What a win by the Springboks. I mean, what can you say other than wow? Probably almost perfect second half, and the way it was achieved was exceptional. uh, I must admit, there's not too many unhappy Springbok supporters this morning, and what a game to get up with. With me, as always, Gavin Rich. Gav, you watching that with a bunch of people there. I see people moving around in the background there. So, just let's start off with. That wasn't expected. I mean, I suppose we always thought it could happen, and they could sort of the damn wall could break, but I don't think we expected it to happen, especially probably after that first half and all the disruptions with injuries.
Well, firstly, Brenden, you recall in our preview with Nick earlier in the week, I said that I really like this team and it's an exciting team. That the only problem was that whether they would gel in the first game. But I said if things stick, I did say I wouldn't be surprised. I said there are two things that we could have on Sunday morning: is a nearly game, or we could actually have a game where the Springboks have won by a big score. So, I mean, I always hesitate to say, well, I think that the Boks are going to smash the All Blacks, but I've felt for quite a while that the Boks are a superior team to them. We gave them the Springboks gave them a good hiding in Nelspruit a couple of years ago, and then didn't, and actually should have probably won that game by more, and then didn't follow up the following week in Johannesburg, and then there was that game at Twickenham where the South Africans won quite comfortably. Obviously, the World Cup final was never going to be like that, but I do think that, and even last week, I mean, South Africa lost narrowly, but there was a lot of there were a lot of narratives in that game that I think we'd agree that where South Africa conspired against themselves. I thought today that they were playing to the same script for a while. You recall that I'm just moving a bit so that you move that thing out the way. Today it was like going to a similar script at one stage, and we got into South Africa got into the New Zealand 22 very early in the game. They looked quite completely dominant, and then there was the first line-out of the match went against the throw. 9 minutes later, Cheslin Colby went over the line, but he went over on his back, so he lost the ball. And then, of course, there was that Argus Snyman try that was disallowed. So I think a lot of South Africans would have been sitting there thinking to themselves, here we go again. And then it was the New Zealanders who scored first in the game, and they took a 7-0 lead, which was hardly deserved. And I thought to myself, well, this is going to be another one of those games where the Boks are superior, but they just somehow don't get it right on the scoreboard. But in the end, they did. And as you say, the second half, but I think there was like a slow poison throughout that game. It was almost inevitable what was going to happen after halftime. The All Blacks were just having to make so many tackles. They were sort of pinned in their own half for the entire game. And this time, the Boks got the balance right. They didn't. Somebody said to me, "This is the best period of play I've seen from the Boks for a long time." And I said, actually, the best period of play from the Boks since Ellis Park, that first 20 minutes at Ellis Park was as good as I've ever seen from the Springboks. And then in the second half, they managed to convert what they were threatening to do then.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I was one of them. I think we WhatsApped each other sort of during the game. And I mean, I also thought after that first line out, I thought, oh my goodness, here we go again. The Boks get themselves into good positions and then lose it. And then obviously, as you say, Cheslin's try that wasn't allowed, etc. And to be honest, I mean, they scored from their first touch of the ball in our 22. Yeah. And it was when Sasha was down on the ground concussed, so we were down to 14. So they were always going to be, a team like the All Blacks is always going to take advantage of that. But I mean, the only real positive from that first half was Cheslin's. I mean, the Boks were doing a lot of play and they were winning a lot of the aerial battle. But Cheslin's intercept was the only thing that really sort of brought a positive result for them. And then I felt the one thing, and I mean, we've spoken about it before, but I thought Wilco Lowe should have been on the field from the start. I'm quite bullish about that. And when he came on, and when Jan Hendrik Wessels came in, you got to give Jan Hendrik Wessels also a lot of props there. They destroyed that All Black scrum, and that led to the first try after the half time, Cheslin's second try. And it was just from there, it just seemed like it was a totally different ball game. The All Blacks were suddenly looking extremely vulnerable. And I looked at the stats now while you were talking. They missed 46 tackles in that game. They missed 40 against the Pumas a couple of weeks ago. And Scott Robertson's got some real problems there.
They started to slip off tackles as the game went on. Their defense was actually really good in the first part of the game, I thought, the All Blacks. And I think as the game went on and South Africa's physical superiority and superiority when it came to winning possession sort of went on, that's when the All Blacks started to fall off tackles. And I think once they were more than a converted try behind, I think obviously their heads would have started dropping a bit. And from then on, it was always going to be the Bok game. So you sort of say you're bullish because obviously there were two Bulls
I didn't
players
mean
on
it
in the
that
front.
way, but
But there was an aspect of this game which, it might sound incendiary to say it because Sasha was good when he was on, but there might have been something that conspired in South Africa's favour today as well, in the sense that once Sasha went off, it was Marnie and Damien together, and those guys have played a lot of rugby together as well. So when they played for the Stormers, they won the URC as a combination. I've always felt that Damien's best. I know he's played most of his games for the Springboks at fullback, but I've always felt that centre is his best position, and I was really pleased to see him get the man of the match because that was really why I was so excited about this team, is that they had those three receivers, as you say. Can you tell me though, because I was a bit confused in that second half because Fussy went off, which is obviously a problem going forward, but Fussy went off. Esterhuizen went on, but it still felt like Damien was spending a lot of time like as a 12 rather than as a fullback. Yeah.
Well, especially on the attack, he sort of was still doing that second playmaker role. He came into the back line with Marnie, and they worked that very well. And I think there was two occasions I said also, watching the game, during the game that, okay, you can see there because there was a move where Marnie took the ball and they came around the other side, and then suddenly Damien was at 10. So they did that quite a bit. So he was at fullback, but I think on attack he went back to 12, which was interesting. And Ethan Hooker, well, I mean, we can start talking about some of the individuals, but Ethan Hooker was exceptional on the night. The way he was in the air, I don't think he might have lost one ball in the air. And just that run back, it just shows how powerful he is. Yeah, and I think a lot of this team, while we might say they're young, I think the one thing we didn't say this week, which a lot of people didn't say this week, is that all those young players are players with immense character. I mean, Grant Williams, that tackle in the 76th minute on Will Jordan to save that try.
Yeah.
That's character in the game. I mean, anybody who's been involved in sport, yes, coaches talk about character way too much, but it was certainly showed in their backline. Sasha's another one. Marnie, I mean, I know Marnie has his distractors, but on a night like tonight, he kicked 6 from 7, so he was exceptional. But I think you're right that Stormers link really helped, and then the other guys filled in the blanks. We talk all about the backs. I mean, we talked all week about the backs, and we didn't talk much about the forwards. But to me, Ron Nokia, that line-out steal that also led to the try, that was a crucial moment. The line-out obstruction that the All Blacks had just after that on the box line. There's small moments. They all went the box way in that second half, and that also helped. But Erkie had a big game. Jasper Visser had a huge game. I thought Sia and Peter Steff were their normal high standards.
Peter Steff, ranging up wide. Peter Steff was brilliant, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say anybody played a bad game. I mean, even Kobus Reinach, who made a couple of mistakes at the back of the scrum, and the All Blacks got away with a couple of things, their hands on the ball and things like that. You still don't feel he had anything less than the 8 out of 10 game. He was still good. So I mean, it's a wonderful night. I wrote. I mean, you haven't had a chance to read my match report about it. I said this is one of those that you tell your grandkids about. The All Blacks losing by 30 in New Zealand is unheard of. And I think the next question I want to ask you, because you've toured New Zealand a lot, like I have. This is not going to go down very well in New Zealand. There's already been a bit of a crisis of confidence over Scott Robertson, and they're going to take this very bad. They take a 1-point loss like the end of the world, but this one they're going to take even worse.
Well, look, last week they defended their fortress, and they really wanted to put everything into doing that. And in the end, they were quite fortunate to do so because, I think the Springboks conspired against themselves last week. And right at the end of the game, it looked as if the Boks were just getting more and more dominant. So last week they defended their fortress like only just. And then the field of battle went off to a different fortress, and it was almost like they were properly invaded this time. The invaders came and they torched the place, and they burnt the place down. They burnt the place down. It was a bit like that, and you'll vouch for this. I've said it to a few times in the build up to the series that everybody was sort of putting too much emphasis on the Eden Park game, and I think I reminded yourself and Nick like during the week, or maybe it was the previous week, that whoever wins the last game is the one that will be remembered the longest. Yeah, and this result today completely erases the memory of last week. It has to. Yes, the Eden Park Fortress is still there. They're going to defend it against Australia in a couple of weeks' time. But when it comes to where New Zealand stand in the World Rugby Firmament, the only thing I'm actually sorry about today was there's that ridiculous call in the other game against a forward pass right at the end where Australia managed to get a bonus point, a losing bonus point. Otherwise the Springboks would actually be top of the log tonight, and I can't actually see them getting stopped now because I can't see the Wallabies winning both games in New Zealand against New Zealand, and I can't. Well, maybe the All Blacks will win both games, but they've got an inferior points difference to us now. And South Africa are playing Argentina, who have given away the home ground advantage by playing their home game at Twickenham. So to me, it's now advantage South Africa again. And I think I said it earlier that when you look back and everybody was like, everybody's doom and gloom because South Africa lost to Australia. But the first 20 minutes of that game, I think Joe Schmidt. I think that if you ask Joe Schmidt, he might be one of the people who wasn't that surprised about today's result because he seemed really impressed with what the Boks did to his team for the first 20 minutes at Ellis Park. And the Springboks showed a glimpse there of what they can do. But what they did today was make that statement win. I mean, there's no longer an argument that we can't ever do without Eben Etzebeth, or we can't ever do without Andre Pollard. If you can go to New Zealand and you can win 43-10 at any New Zealand venue and beat the All Blacks there, then there's no longer an argument that there's players who are indispensable. And I think that that's what Rassie really is working towards. And now he can go forward. And, I have said it to you before, even before today's game, I do think that Damian Willems's best position is 12. And I'd love to see him carry. I'm not saying that Damian Delendi should never play again, but certainly I think Damian Delendi should play a lot at 12 now. It's going to be interesting, though, because there is that injury to Fassi. So, and there is that sort of talk that at some stage Willie's going to be phased out. So we do have a potential problem at fullback if we do go with Damian as the number 12 going forward. But they've got so many options, and I mentioned I think that it almost worked having Marnie come on, but Sasha was brilliant whilst he was on as well. So it was. We've got that. Yeah, you've got that brilliance. That I think people keep talking about it. They don't have fear. They did go back to a more conservative game plan after Ellis Park, and it was understandable. They were definitely a lot more conservative in Cape Town, and even last week it was there was a lot more sort of one-off runners and that kind of thing at Eden Park. And then I think they were just stunned when they went behind early like they did. But in this game, the Boks actually showed what they can do with Tony Ball. It wasn't that they eschewed their strengths. There was a lot of obviously aerial kicking. I mean the aerial battles become a set piece in rugby because obviously if you win the ball back or you force the opposition into mistakes, you're going to get a scrum. So it actually becomes a set piece, and that's become incredibly important in modern rugby. So to me, the Springboks, they just got everything right today because what they did today was what they didn't do at Ellis Park. They got the balance right. At Ellis Park, they got the balance right for the first 20 minutes. And then after that, they got it horribly wrong. They tried to run from all over the place. Today, they had the balance perfect, and they showed what they can do. And you turn around and you sort of say, well, the South Africa beat New Zealand 43-10 today. Wow, that's quite impressive. But they were 22-0 up against Australia, what is a much better Australian team now than was at Ellis Park a couple of weeks ago. They could have carried on in that game, and they could have won that game big as well. And then, in which case, the whole narrative of these last couple of weeks might have been different. So maybe we're sitting here now with the benefit of hindsight, which of course is always a perfect science. But maybe it was actually a good thing that South Africa did have that hiccup there and did maybe wake up, serve as a bit of a wake-up call. Because now you're sitting here, and I don't think there's going to be too many people who are going to be thinking about the Australian game anymore. I think if you traded the two things, if you asked the South African, what would you rather do? Would you rather lose 38-22, whatever it was, 36-22 or whatever it was at Ellis Park to Australia? Or would you trade that for a 43-10 win over New Zealand in Wellington? And I think a lot of people would say, I'll take the latter. Because they are the traditional foe and they are the benchmark. I've said it on another forum earlier this week. I expect the Aussies to run out of gas and not actually do that well against New Zealand. I do think that the Rugby Championships is now between South Africa and New Zealand. Although, having said that, obviously now it's going to be a massive blow to the All Blacks. Just like the Australian game was a big psychological blow to South Africa, this will be a huge blow to them They're not used to it. Remember, South Africa did lose 57-0 to the All Blacks back in the day, and 57 and I can't remember if you were there. 57-15 in Durban the
Yeah,
year
I was
before that.
there.
So South
Yeah.
Africa, and they lost 53-3 to England in 2002. And I don't know why I'm sort of bringing up all these depressing stats, but 49-0 under Jake White in Brisbane, I think it was 2006. South Africa have suffered these kind of defeats before, mainly because we've had some awful sort of like situations in our rugby in the past. And there's been that growing period of like having to sort of bring everybody on cue with the transformation and all that kind of thing. But New Zealand have never lost like this before. I mean, they've never lost by. I mean, their previous biggest defeat, I think, was the one at Twickenham when they lost 35-7. So this is going to be like a, you know, when they play the New Zealand anthem, I was sitting with people and I said that the only time, because I love their anthem, but it sort of goes on about God defending New Zealand. And I said the only time that, because I don't ever see New Zealand as a country under threat from anybody. I don't think anybody wants to invade them or attack them. So I often sort of think the only time that God needs to defend New Zealand is when they come up against a proper rugby team. And today they did. So it's like, and to them it will be. It will be like us, like South Africa, that you go into national mourning when you suffer a big defeat. I think the All Blacks will go into mourning. So I'd be a bit concerned from their viewpoint of how they're going to recover from this and whether they're going to be able to bounce back against Australia in a few weeks' time.
Well, there's gonna be a lot of pressure on them. That's for sure. I mean, we've both been in New Zealand. Like in the World Cup when Richie McCaw got injured, it was almost like it was the end of the world for New Zealand. They had national press conferences on TV, and I mean, we still used to laugh about how ridiculous some of that was. But they certainly don't do self-reflection very well, and they'll take it very personally. The one thing I think in their favor, especially the Australian thing, is I think one of the tests is at Eden Park as well. So
it's next week, the next one.
Yeah, and so with that pressure and with the record, I think there'll be a lot of emphasis on that. I think the Wallabies can. Before this week, I thought the Wallabies might end that run for them at Eden Park, but I certainly think that there's going to be some sort of backlash, or there'll be a. If there isn't, then I think Scott Robertson's days are going to be very numbered there. I think though, Gav, I mean, the one thing I think this does for me, and I mean, I remarked, I sent you a quick WhatsApp about a certain sort of journo friend of ours who loves bashing the box and loves bashing the All Blacks. And I can't wait to read his match report. I hope he's writing it. But
he won't write it.
Yeah. No, he probably won't. No, but the message that this sends out to the rest of the world, because this season the Boks haven't been that impressive. There has been cracks that have been showing, and I think the rest of the world probably. And then the last time when they played the Wallabies, I mean that. The match report we refer to, the guy who wrote it, was quite gleeful that the Boks were losing like that. And
absolutely.
So to me, I think just the message that it sends out to the rest of the world, if I'm a foreign coach, if the Boks can win by 40 in New Zealand, and fair enough. I mean, modern rugby, these blowout scores do happen quite often.
Yes.
But they don't happen in New Zealand. And I think that's the remarkable thing. No matter how bad an All Black team has been, these things don't happen in New Zealand. And so that message to the rest of the world, I think, is quite a scary one 2 years out from the World Cup, that the Boks can play a whole different team and win by 40 or 30 odd in New Zealand. It must be a hell of a scary thing for opposition coaches.
Well, look, it happened to South Africa at Ellis Park a few weeks ago. There were a lot of people who say you don't see the Boks losing like that in Johannesburg. And I would say that the thing about Ellis Park is because of the altitude and the way the Springboks played that game, freaky things do happen in Johannesburg. I mean, we've seen some really freaky games.
Well, not just on the rugby field.
Yeah, we've seen some freaky games in Joburg over the years. So I sort of parked that in my bank, like 38 unanswered points or 36, whatever it was. It was 30 odd unanswered points by Australia in that game, and people were saying, "Geez, how did that ever happen?" And I thought, well, the Boks simply played themselves out on their feet, so they were. Whereas. And I don't think that this is a great All Black team. I mean, I really don't. And I mean, we did sort of talk to you, and I sat on the fence, but I just always feel that I thought the Boks might conspire against themselves against Wellington. But if in my Supersport.com preview yesterday, I did say that my gut feel is that this Boks team is a lot more talented and has a lot more going for it than the All Blacks do. But it's just really a question of whether they would gel and whether they would once again do what they did last week and maybe and which they did do to some extent during the game. Let's face it. I mean, the Boks really dominated the game. Everybody's talking about the second half, but How New Zealand were 3 points ahead at halftime, I don't know. I mean, you said earlier that the only good thing that they did in the first half was that intercept try. I'd beg to differ. I think that there was a lot of scrambling from the All Blacks. That try that was disallowed for Argeus Neyman would have, on a different day, that they wouldn't have picked up that little knock on, and the Boks would have been 7-0 ahead. And another Bok team, when going 7-0 down in a game that they dominated like that, and given what happened last week, might suddenly go into their shells and said, goodness gracious, what's happening here? We're playing as part of the same old movie. But they didn't. They carried on with their bravery, and that was what impressed me. And yes,
I think, Gavin, I was going to say, just to qualify, when I say they didn't do, I said what I meant is in terms of positive reward. So they did a lot of the play and they were dominating, but in terms of coming into the change room 10-7 down, there wasn't a lot of positive reward that they got from the efforts.
Absolutely. And if this game hadn't ended in a Bok win, one of the talking points would have been the refereeing. I thought that they weren't rewarded in the scrum. There was a lot of things where I thought that the Springbok, the calls went against the Boks in that first half. So it could easily have been if Argeus had scored, had that try allowed, and then this Boks had scored another try in that first half. We could easily have been looking. Well, it was only 7 points away from 50 anyway. But we could easily have been looking at a 50-point game here because the Springboks were that dominant. They were just so dominant in that game. Normally you watch a Bok All Black game and there's shifts in momentum and you see the other guy come back, and on the scoreboard the New Zealanders had momentum in that first half, but they never really had momentum in the game. I always, when we went to halftime, I thought my feeling was the Boks are playing really well. They're just not converting, and it's a matter of time before eventually they get rewarded. And once, if they do go ahead, in fact, I said to my mates here, I said that what's very important is that the Boks just don't concede straight after halftime. If they conceded a try after halftime and the All Blacks had gone 10 points ahead, that would have given New Zealand legs, and it would have possibly have been a big more psychological blow to the Boks. But they didn't. They scored first. They took the lead. And then once they did that, there was the momentum that we spoke about last week. Remember, last week we said that if the Boks had scored just before halftime there, when they should really have. I remember they were 14-3 down at Eden Park, and they should really have scored then, but they had that knock on at one of the lineouts. Grant Williams knocked it on, and then there was that. I think that was that free kick for Bulking when Andre Pollard had affected that very good 50-22. If the Boks had scored then and gone to the break at 14-10, they would have had the momentum, and I'm convinced that they would have won last week. So we look back at the season and we sort of say, well, last week New Zealand defended their fortress. In South Africa, the Springboks weren't good in Cape Town, even though they won the game. In Joburg, they were outplayed in the last hour of the game, but I still don't. I'm one South African who hasn't forgotten that first 20 minutes. I'm one South African who remembers that first 20 minutes and saw a lot of promise in that first 20 minutes. And we saw that promise get converted in the second half today.
Yeah, look, I mean, we got obviously now look a bit ahead. The two next games against Argentina, there's probably going to be changes. I mean, Lurt, from what sounds like, Lurt is out. It sounds also like Sasha was sitting there with a moon boot on, and that's never good. And having had a partner who's just gone through something like that, I know that's not a good look to have a moon boot on that quickly after an injury. But so they both probably out. Cheslin doesn't look more like looks like he was winded by that no arms tackle. Sasha's concussed, so he can probably in 2 weeks play. But I mean, other than that, I mean, it's quite an interesting question for us. Who does he go with? Because he's now got the license, and it was interesting. I was listening to the press conference, and he was saying they were giving a lot of credit, him and Sia, to the fact to the older players, obviously that their whole system about if you're not playing, you become the opposition. And he said that was one of the factors that really helped the Boks this week, is that you had an Eben Etzebeth playing as an All Black in their team training, and you had all these experienced players doing that, and that prepared the young guys a lot better, which is very true. But now comes the point as well, and we've spoken about it before, is these older guys are under threat now, because these youngsters have shown they can do it, and not just in the traditional sense. You've got a Grant Williams who's been on the wing before, but today on the wing he was an exception. You've got Ethan Hooker, who really doesn't deserve to be dropped after today's performance. So it's going to be a very interesting team selection next time.
But let's also be honest, Brenden. if you're in Rassie's shoes, even if that wasn't true, even if the Bok older guys weren't actually that helpful behind the scenes, isn't that what you would say? Because you want harmony in your camp.
Probably.
You need to be all inclusive. You need to make everybody feel they're part of the group. I mean, if I was one of those guys watching that game, I'm not in the Springbok environment, so maybe I don't have that selflessness that they have. But if I wanted to carry on playing to the World Cup, I might have been watching that game and sort of thinking to myself, this is great for the Springboks, but it might not be that great for me, because some of those guys aren't as indispensable as we thought they were. So it is what Rassie has to say. At the end of the day, I'm not disputing that that's the way Rassie feels, but it's also, he would be, if I was his media advisor, I'd be advising to say those things, because he also said it on TV. It sounds like he said the same things in the press conference, because I haven't seen the press conference yet.
I didn't see the TV one, so.
Yeah, no, he was interviewed. I think he was interviewed by Jeff Wilson, and he said very similar. He went very quickly to because it was said like, you've played this alternative team. They've made a statement, and then Rassie said, we've got incredible depth. We've got all these other guys who can still play. And as I say, whilst I'm pushing the virtues of Damian Delende here, Damian Willemse, and thinking that he's shown something today that the Boks need to use going forward, because I think he does bring a different dynamic to the South African attacking game. And you will vouch for it that I've been saying for a while now that having those three receivers and having Damian there will give them a different, that will perfect Tony Ball. Although that is true, I'm not for one moment saying that you throw away Damian Delende or Jesse Creel, because Kanan was very good today as well. I'm not saying that you throw those guys away. But now you know that you've got these guys that can take you forward. And you've got those guys, because let's face it, somebody gets injured. We had injuries today. Fussie's injured now. Earlier in the week, I was saying that they can dispense with Willie. Now, Willie's probably going to have to be back in the mix, because you need more than one fullback in your squad. And I can't think of too many other, outside of maybe Kyo and Horn, or the fact that Sasha can also play there. And, other than Damien Willemse and Willie that can play fullback. So it's an interesting one. What I would like to see Rassie do is actually play the same team, though. I mean, injuries excluded. I would like for once this team to get a chance to back up. You know what this game reminds me of? And I did write, I don't know if you read I don't think you ever read my stuff, but I did write in my supersport.com.
I do so, Gav, don't worry.
In my supersport.com preview to this game, I went back to 2005. The Boks played against Australia. It was in the Jake White era. They played in Mandela. Okay, it wasn't as important a game as this, but they played against Australia at Ellis Park in a Mandela Cup game. In those days, the Mandela Cup games, you'll remember, weren't always part of the Tri-Nations. This was separate. There was going to be a proper Tri-Nations game the following week in Pretoria. And that was the first time. I remember Jake chose what a lot of us thought was a different team, an experimental team. And there were two players who played in the midfield that day for the first time together. It was John de Villiers and Jacques Fourie. And they cooked in that game. And after that, prior to that, remember, it was Davet Barry and Maurice Jabeur.
Yeah.
And whoever, maybe one of those guys was injured at that time as well. But those guys never ever came back and played together. It was after that, it was Jean and it was Jacques Fourie. And I do think that this game, I always felt beforehand that this game, if everything went well, had the potential to do that. We're now talking about Ethan Hooker as possibly a permanent number 11. We wouldn't have thought that before this game. We would have thought he's there because it's an experiment and he'll play one game and maybe we won't see him again until the end of your tour. But now you've got to say, well, I'd be very sorry to see him not play at his home ground of Kings Park in 2 weeks' time with the number 11 on his back.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's very true, because I mean, then you say to yourself, what were the plans? Because surely Kurt Arends and Ed Wolf and Amava will be back. So you've got all these options, and I think obviously that's where we've been saying with the Boks heading towards. And I think a lot of it, I mean, I know you're not on social media a lot, but there was a lot of talk on social media before that Aussie game about how the Boks could pick 5 teams, and there were people in rugby journalism who were carrying on about this, and there was maybe a bit of a bloody nose that they got after that Aussie game, because you're only as good as the team you can put on the field. So you can maybe pick 5 teams, but you can only. The thing to me now, I suppose it will the whole thing will revolve around what they need to beat Argentina. Argentina's obviously got very different strengths to New Zealand, and they're also very good with the high ball. So I'd like to see Ethan Hooker stay there, but I mean, if they I think Rassie's earned the amount of trust to know what he's doing, and especially of today, it's hard to question it when you've won by 30 in New Zealand. But yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting in Durban because the Aussies have won in Durban before, and we remember you and I were both in 2015. So
2015, yeah.
they won't be overawed by that, and they'll quite fancy their chances in Durban. But yeah, I
There
think
was
this. It's,
context to that.
yeah, there was context. We both
There was
know.
context to that Durban game. There was context to
Yeah.
that Durban game. Haneke had pushed the guys during the week. There was context. The Argentina haven't really ever sort of cooked in South Africa. I mean, when we've travelled. I mean, apart from that game, there was a game
Well,
I think before
there was one that
2023.
Louis couldn't had to kick a last minute, I think in
Way back.
PE. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was in the
So,
Real Australia era. Let's be honest, that was in the Real Australia era. I mean, South Africa were in a very different sort of state then. That wasn't a great cycle of players. You know, we've got a different cycle of players now. We've got a very strong cycle of players. Argentina haven't. You know, the Boks gave them a good hiding in Nelspruit last year. The Pumas do get up for the South African games in Argentina. Although people forget that the Argentina game last year was a little bit like the Ellis Park one. Remember how the Boks cooked early on, and it was also a game where it was almost like we're going to look too easy. I think the Boks went almost 20-0 up or something. It was something like that. They scored early tries, and it looked like they were going to win easily. And then I think they sort of felt they got ahead of themselves. Marnie, funnily enough, was at fly hot because he's often guilty of doing that, thinking now we've got space everywhere, we can go mad. And then the Argentina came back and won that game. And they wouldn't have won the game if Marnie didn't miss that kick in the end either,
yeah.
let's not forget. So I think that the Boks will win both games against Argentina. I don't think that Australia will win both games against the All Blacks. If there's a team that wins both games in that series, it will be the All Blacks. I'm actually not, you know, to be honest with you, I'm not, and there's no point in coming in here if I'm not going to be honest. I'm not that sold. I'm not that sold on Australia. They were lucky to beat Argentina last week, and they were properly beaten by them today, I thought. So to me, as I think I've already said, I think it's now between New Zealand and between New Zealand and South Africa. But and the pivotal thing is, are the New Zealanders going to be able to recover from that? That's the most important thing, because if they throw the baby out with the bathwater and completely overreact, then they could actually be in trouble against Argentina. I mean, against Australia, and I don't care where they play. But I just think that it's now between them and South Africa, and I back South Africa because I do think that they've got the easier games. Just in the sense of playing in Durban and then giving away their, you know, Argentina. I mean, they've obviously, it was their decision, but they've given away home ground advantage by playing at Twickenham. That to me is the Springbok game, because there's such a huge expat community living in London. So they've given away their home ground advantage. That's where they test South Africa normally. And I think that South Africa have had their wake-up call now. They had their wake-up call in Johannesburg. They took a while to recover from it. They were a little bit sort of squeaky bum, as the saying goes in Cape Town, in the sense that, and they were, let's face it, there was a bit of an odd sort of thing going on in that game when Jean-Luc Deprez was forced out through injury. By the way, Jasper Wiese was excellent today, but they lost Jasper Wiese just before JL Deprez just before, you know, on the morning of that game. They ended up having Andre Esterhuizen as the sort of only loose forward backup to Quagga and the guys who did play in that game. Pieter-Steph du Toit wasn't there in that game, and so they were quite nervous. So they had that blip. They had that blip because of Joburg. Now they're over that blip, and that confidence will have come back and be all-consuming. They've gone back after this game. They would have gone back to the confidence they had leading into that first 20 minutes against Australia. It's almost like we've now sort of reversed the clock. You mentioned our friends overseas who took great glee in sort of like writing the Boks off after. I mean, there was even a headline in one of the newspapers that I read, overseas newspapers, going on about, is this the end of the Boks? Is this the end of the Bok reign? And I remember thinking that's a really silly thing to think. And I think today sort of confirmed that that's not the case. Maybe the Boks won't necessarily go and win every game from here, but they're right back at the top.
That's all we got time for now. We'll be back tomorrow with Nick Mallett and giving his Gav, I hope you've saved something for tomorrow. But we'll be back with Nick Miller tomorrow, and we'll go through the game again after we've all had a sleep on it. But it's going to be hard not to be just as happy and excited about this result as I think every South African is at the moment. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button. Leave your comments below. You don't have to always agree with Gavin and I know a lot of you don't in the comments, but we love reading them. And we'll chat to you guys soon. Gav, thanks. I'll chat to you tomorrow with Nick.
Okay, see you nice and early tomorrow, by the looks of things.
We'll try and do it as early as possible on Sunday. It's a reason to get up now, at least. It's not like we're after the Ellis Park game. Anyway, cheers, Gav.
Cheers, Brendan.